to welcome you back to Thrive in the Word. Today we're going to continue our study of the 7 churches of Revelation. We're going to be looking today at verse number 14. Now, John has just described who or what Jesus was wearing. Now, what was that significant of? Because that showed Jesus' position. And it showed Jesus' position as the high priest. Now remember, Jesus is standing in the middle of the 7 lampstands. The 7 churches is what the lampstands represent. And what is Jesus to the 7 churches? He is their high priest. He is their intercessor. But John doesn't end there. John begins to describe Jesus in a very powerful way. This is what he says in verse number 14. And his head and his hair were white like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. Just think about that. When John last saw Jesus at the ascension, Jesus' hair was very likely brown. He was probably had some waves in it. How many of you realize Jesus was Jewish? He was olive complected. I believe Jesus in his new body was the same. They recognized him. But now Jesus is completely different. Now Jesus has got hair that's white. And John says not only is his hair white, but it's white like wool. Now remember, John is a human. And he's trying to explain in human words what he's seeing. How many of you know that no matter what language you speak, it's very limited in describing who God is? Very limited. So John here is trying to describe, he's trying to write down what he's seeing. And he's trying to describe it in a way that a human would understand it. But you know what? I don't believe that what John saw comes anywhere close to what we could understand from these words. That his hair was white. His hair was white like wool. And then he goes on and he says, like snow. In other words, John. We see here John even trying to struggle to describe how white Jesus' hair was. Now you say, well, what does that signify? What does that represent? It represents his purity. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever described the holiness of God? It's not describable. Not in any language. How many of you realize the English language is very limited? There's other languages that are much more descriptive, but in any language, you cannot describe the holiness of God. Now remember, Jesus is in the middle of the 7 churches. Remember that he is the high priest in the middle of the 7 churches. And now remember that Jesus is holy beyond description. His hair is white like snow. It's white like wool. And then John goes on and he says, and his eyes are like a flame of fire. Have you ever run into a person that has spent so much time in the presence of God that you're almost nervous just to be around them, and you're nervous to let them look at you? I've had that experience a couple times. I remember one of the men who was on my ordination council many years ago. 1979, I was ordained into ministry. But he He had a look in his eyes. He had a relationship with Jesus that changed the way that he looked at people. It was piercing, but yet loving. And Jesus here is described as having eyes like fire. I think Jesus here had eyes like laser beams that could cut through anything. He could cut through the actions and see the very motives of a person's heart. Jesus sees everything. He sees not only the actions that people do, but he sees the why in the actions. He understands those actions that people do because they've been hurt and because they've been wounded. He understands the actions that people do because they have an out-of-control desire for fame, for fortune. They have an out-of-control desire for sex and other things. He sees the why. He pierces, his eyes pierce, and he sees everything about you. Everything. He knows your faults. You know, when you confess your sin, it doesn't surprise Jesus at all because he already knew it. When you go and you declare your righteousness, it doesn't surprise Jesus. When you declare the calling of God on your life, it doesn't surprise Jesus. He already knew it. His eyes pierce and see everything like a laser beam would pierce through even the thickest of steel. Jesus' eyes pierce. But along with that piercing is healing. Along with that piercing is love and compassion for the person he's looking at. Oh, what a beautiful picture of Jesus. Holy. Holy beyond description. Yet his eyes are eyes like flames of fire. How many of you know John didn't know what a laser beam was, but I believe that's what John was seeing. They're eyes that pierce anything. But yet he loves you, and he cares about you. He wants to help you, deliver you, set you free. What a beautiful, beautiful picture of Jesus.